The winter of 1944 transformed the East into an ice graveyard. And in that graveyard there was a kitchen where meals were served that no one, absolutely no one, should have eaten. But before I tell you what really happened there, let me tell you something essential. This story isn't a horror film. It's a testimony. And if you want to understand how far humanity can sink when it stops looking at itself in the mirror, then subscribe to this channel. Because together we're going to explore truths that history has tried to bury under tons of silence and shame. December 1944. Somewhere in the snow-covered forests of Poland, near the border with Ukraine, a convoy of American prisoners has just pulled up in front of a camp that no one had ever mentioned in any official report. The men climb down from the trucks, shivering, not only from the biting cold that pierces their skin like 1,000 needles, but because they already know they will probably never see their country again. Among them is Elliot Marsh, 32 years old, a trained cook, captured 3 weeks earlier in an ambush in the Ardennes. Elliot is tall, broad-shouldered, with the calloused hands of a man who has spent his life wielding knives and pots and pans. Before the war, he ran a small restaurant in Baltimore. He knows meat, spices, slow cooking. He knows how to turn anything into something edible. It is precisely this skill that will condemn him to live through hell. When the camp gates open, Elliot discovers a parallel world, wooden barracks that seem to be rotting away, skeletal men watching them pass without a word, their eyes empty like bottomless pits. The smell is the first thing that hits him. A mixture of smoke, burnt flesh, decay, and something else, something sweet and sickening that he can't identify. He feels his stomach churn, but he grits his teeth. An SS officer, his face smooth and impassive, approaches the group of prisoners and begins sorting them like cattle. Some are taken to the forced labor barracks. Others, those who seem too weak or too old, are led to another section of the camp, its destination unknown. Elliot understands immediately that he doesn't want to know where they are going. Then the officer stops in front of him. He looks him up and down, consults a file, and says something in German to another soldier. Elliot doesn't understand the words, but he understands the tone. He's just been selected for something specific. He's separated from the group, led through the camp, and taken to a stone building sturdier than the others with chimneys belching black smoke into the gray sky. It's the camp kitchen, or rather the kitchen reserved for SS officers. Elliot is pushed inside. The heat hits him like a slap. There are lit stoves, giant boiling pots, shelves filled with canned goods and sacks of flour. Everything seems almost normal. Almost. A man appears from the back of the room. His name is Klaus. He's the head cook, a German man in his 50s with thick hands and a grease-stained apron. He speaks broken English, but enough to make himself understood. He explains to Elliot that he needs help. Rations are running low, supply convoys are no longer arriving regularly, and the officers are demanding meals befitting their rank. Klaus has read Elliot's file. He knows he was a cook. He tells him, if you cook well, you live. If you cook badly, you join the others. Elliot nods. He has no choice. Klaus shows him the storerooms, explains the schedules, the menus to prepare. Everything seems manageable, almost reassuring. But as Elliot begins to inspect the supplies, he notices something strange. There's very little meat. A few scrawny chickens, 1 or 2 hams hanging, but nothing to feed 50 officers for weeks. He asks Klaus where the rest of the meat is. Klaus doesn't answer right away. He turns to the stove, stirs a pot, then simply says, "We adapt. Here, we use what we have." Elliot frowns. He doesn't understand. Klaus adds, "You'll see tomorrow. We're getting a delivery." And that's all. He says nothing more. Elliot spends the night in a small room adjoining the kitchen, lying on a straw mattress that smells of mildew. He can't sleep. The sounds of the camp haunt him. Distant shouts, sporadic gunshots, the dull rumble of machines he can't see but hears running all night. He wonders what he's doing there. He wonders if he'll survive this war. He wonders if the war at this point still has any meaning. The next morning before dawn, Klaus woke him. "The delivery's coming, come on." Elliot got up, still groggy, and followed Klaus outside. It was still dark, and the cold biting harder than the day before. They walked toward a section of the camp Elliot hadn't seen yet, an isolated area behind the main barracks. There was a barbed wire fence, and beyond it, pits. Huge pits, dug into the frozen ground. Elliot felt his heart race. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't look away. The pits were filled with bodies. Hundreds of bodies piled on top of each other, some still partially covered in snow, others completely naked, their skin gray and stretched taut over the bones. Elliot froze. He felt like throwing up. Klaus put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't look too long. It's not good for your head." But Elliot watches. He can't help it. He sees men, women, children. He sees faces frozen in expressions of terror, pain, resignation. And then he sees something else. Near one of the pits, there's a team of prisoners working. They're wearing thick coveralls and face masks. They're using hooks and saws to cut up some of the bodies. Elliot doesn't understand what they're doing. Not yet. Klaus tells him, "Come on, we'll take what we need." They approach a wooden cart piled high with pieces of meat wrapped in gray cloths. The meat is pale, almost white, with bluish veins running through it. Elliot looks at Klaus. He's starting to understand, but his brain refuses to accept what he's seeing. Klaus picks up one of the packages and says, "We have no more cattle, so we use what we have. The officers don't ask questions. Neither do you." Elliot takes a step back. He shakes his head. No, I can't. I refuse." Klaus looks him straight in the eyes. His face is cold, hardened by months, maybe years of this filthy work. "You refuse, and in an hour you'll be in that pit. It's as simple as that. You cook, you live. You refuse, you die." Elliot feels his legs tremble. He looks around. SS soldiers watch them from a distance, rifles in hand, ready to shoot anyone who steps out of line. He watches the prisoners dismembering the bodies, their faces blank, mechanical, as if they were no longer quite human. He understands that in this camp, humanity no longer exists. There is only survival. And to survive, he must cook what Klaus has just shown him. He closes his eyes. He breathes deeply. And he nods. Klaus smiles slightly, not with joy, but with relief. "Good. Let's go back to the kitchen. You have work to do." They load the cart and head back toward the building. Elliot walks like an automaton. He doesn't think about anything. He can't afford to think. If he does, he collapses. Once in the kitchen, Klaus places the packages of meat on the central table. He begins to unpack them. Elliot then sees what he must transform into a meal for the officers, pieces of human flesh, cut with surgical precision, as if it were beef or pork. Klaus shows him how to prepare them, how to remove the lean parts, how to marinate the meat to mask the taste, how to cook it slowly until it becomes tender. He speaks with professional detachment as if he were explaining a simple recipe. Elliot listens, but he hears nothing. His hands move reflexively, used to working in the kitchen, but his mind is elsewhere. He thinks about his life before the war. He thinks about his restaurant, about the customers who came to eat his food, who told him it was the best steak they had ever tasted. He thinks about his wife, Sarah, who waited for him at home every evening with a smile. He wonders if she is still alive. He wonders if she would still think of him if she knew what he is doing right now. He wonders if he is still human. The first few weeks in the camp kitchen pass like a nightmare from which there is no awakening. Elliot adapts, but that word is too simple to describe what is truly happening to him. He doesn't adapt. He fragments. There is the Elliot who cooks, the one who cuts the meat, marinates it, and serves it to the officers with a neutral expression and hands that no longer tremble. And then there is the other Elliot, the one who screams silently inside, the one who counts each piece of flesh he transforms into a meal and wonders who that person was before ending up on his cutting board. These two Elliots coexist in the same body, but they never speak to each other. It is the only way to survive. Klaus, the German cook, becomes his guide through this domestic hell. At first, Elliot hates him. He sees him as a monster, a willing accomplice to the horror. But as the days go by, he begins to understand that Klaus is also a prisoner. not in the strictest sense, but a prisoner of his own survival. Klaus was sent here 2 years ago after refusing to join a combat unit. He was given a choice: cook for the officers or be executed for insubordination. He chose to live, and since then, he has cooked. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't look the prisoners in the eye. He concentrates on the pots, the seasonings, the cooking temperatures. It's his way of keeping from going insane. One evening, as they were cleaning the kitchen after service, Klaus sat down on a stool and lit a cigarette. He looked at Elliot silently for a long moment, then said, "You think I'm a monster, don't you?" Elliot didn't answer immediately. He continued wiping the knives, the mechanical hands, then he said, "I think we're all monsters now." Klaus smiled sadly. "No, the monsters are up there in the offices, in the boardrooms where they decide who lives and who dies. We're just tools. Tools that chose not to break." Elliot put down the knife and looked at Klaus. "And you think that makes us better? The fact that we chose to survive?" Klaus took a long drag on his cigarette and blew the smoke toward the ceiling. "No, it just keeps us alive, that's all." This conversation marks a turning point. Elliot begins to see Klaus differently. He understands that the man isn't an ideological Nazi, not a fanatic. He's a survivor like him. And in this camp, survival has no morals. It has only simple rules: obey or die. But this understanding doesn't make the work any easier. Every morning when Elliot wakes up, he has to convince himself again to do what he's doing. He has to tell himself that it's not really human flesh he's preparing, that it's just meat, period. He has to shut down the part of his brain that recognizes textures, colors, smells. He has to become a machine. The SS officers who eat in the dining room adjoining the kitchen are from another world. They arrive every evening in immaculate uniforms, boots gleaming, hair perfectly combed. They laugh, they drink, they talk about the war as if it were a giant game of chess. Elliot sometimes watches them through the small window that separates the kitchen from the dining room. He sees their relaxed, satisfied faces as they devour the dishes he has prepared. Some even compliment him. "Tell the cook it was excellent," one of them says to Klaus one evening. Klaus relays the message to Elliot with a blank stare. Elliot nods and returns to his stove. He wonders what these men would think if they knew what they had just eaten. He wonders if they would even care. Then, one day Elliot discovers something that changes everything. It's late morning and he's preparing a stew for the officers' lunch. Klaus has gone to fetch supplies from another section of the camp, and Elliot finds himself alone in the kitchen for the first time since his arrival. He takes the opportunity to explore a bit, opening cupboards and drawers he's never had time to inspect before. In one of the back cupboards, behind sacks of flour and cans of food, he finds a metal box. It's unlocked. He opens it. Inside are documents, lists, names, dates, weights. Elliot begins to read and his blood runs cold. These are delivery logs. Logs that detail exactly what has been brought to the kitchen each week for months. And there, in black and white, he sees the figures. Delivery January 12, 1944, 47 kilos. Source Barracks 7, East Pits. Delivery February 3, 1944, 63 kilos. Source, convoy arrived February 1st, North Pits. The logs continue like this, page after page, with chilling accounting precision. But that's not all. On some pages, there are handwritten notes. Comments on the quality of the meat. Too lean, difficult to cook. Good texture, well received by the officers. Prefer recent deliveries fresher. Elliot feels his hands tremble. He rereads the notes, unable to look away. Someone, somewhere in this chain of horror, took the time to assess the quality of human flesh as one would assess a piece of beef. He hears footsteps outside. Klaus is coming back. Elliot quickly closes the box and puts it back. He returns to his stove, his heart pounding. Klaus enters, laden with bags of vegetables, and notices nothing. But Elliot has changed. This discovery has shown him that what is happening here is not simply a matter of improvised survival. It is a system, an organized, documented, streamlined system. The SS officers know exactly what they are eating. They know it, and they have established a bureaucracy to manage it efficiently. This is not a shameful secret hidden in the shadows. It is an acknowledged, archived, optimized policy. In the days that followed, Elliot began to observe more closely. He listened to the officers' conversations as they passed the kitchen. He paid attention to the words they used. And one evening, he overheard something that confirmed his worst suspicions. Two officers were talking near the door, thinking no one was listening. One of them said, "The commander is pleased with the streamlining program. We're saving considerable resources." The other replied, "Yes, and the men appreciate it. It's a matter of troop morale. They need to eat properly after operations in the villages." The first added, "Exactly, and besides, it's symbolic. We're consuming our enemies, we're wiping them out completely." They laughed. A light, almost casual laugh, then they walked away. Elliot remains frozen before his stove. He understands now that what he's doing here isn't just a logistical necessity to feed starving soldiers. It's a symbolic act of domination. The Nazis don't just kill their victims, they turn them into food. They ingest them. It's the ultimate form of dehumanization. And he, Elliot Marsh, a cook from Baltimore, has become the instrument of this barbarity. He closes his eyes. He clenches his fists. He feels a dull rage rising within him, a rage he's never felt before. But he knows he can't do anything. Not yet. If he rebels now, he'll die. And his death won't change anything. Then a new prisoner arrives in the kitchen. His name is David. He's a young man in his 20s, a Polish Jew, captured during a raid on a village near Warsaw. David has been assigned to cleaning duties around the kitchen. He arrives every morning, silent, emaciated, his eyes sunken in their sockets. Elliot tries not to look at him, but it's impossible. David reminds him of who he was before the war, a man with a life, dreams, a family. One day, as Elliot is taking out garbage from behind the kitchen, David approaches him. He speaks a little English, learned before the war. He says, "You're American, aren't you?" Elliot hesitates, then nods. David continues, "You cook for them. Do you know what you're cooking?" Elliot doesn't answer. David persists, "You do, don't you?" Elliot glances around to make sure no one is watching. Then he whispers, "I know." David stares intently at him. "Then why do you keep going?" Elliot feels anger rising. "Because if I don't keep going, I'll die. And you're doing what you're told to do to survive, right?" David looks down. "Yes, but one day, we'll all have to answer for what we did here, even if it was to survive." Elliot doesn't know what to say. David turns on his heel and goes back to work. But this conversation plants a seed in Elliot's mind. A seed that will slowly germinate day after day until it becomes a decision. The first real plot twist comes a week later. Elliot is preparing dinner when Klaus receives an unusual visit. A senior officer, whom Elliot has never seen before, enters the kitchen accompanied by an SS doctor. They inspect the premises, asking questions about rations and the origin of the meat. Klaus answers with his usual calm. Then the doctor asks to see the records. Klaus takes them out of the cupboard, the metal box that Elliot had discovered a few days earlier. The doctor scans them, nods, and says something in German. The officer smiles. "Excellent work. The Reichsfuhrer will be pleased to learn that we have optimized resources to this extent. Keep it up." Elliot then understands something even more terrifying. This program isn't a local initiative by a lone commander. It comes from the top. It's approved, perhaps even encouraged, by the highest Nazi authorities. It's not a secret. It's an experiment. An experiment in efficiency and total dehumanization, in how far one can go when certain lives cease to be considered human. And this revelation shatters something within Elliot. He realizes he isn't just cooking to survive. He's participating in something far larger and more monstrous than he could have imagined. That night, lying on his straw mattress, Elliot made a decision. He didn't yet know how or when he would do it, but he knew he had to act. He couldn't just cook and wait for the war to end. He had to find a way to destroy this machine from within. And to do that, he first had to understand exactly how it worked. The following weeks transformed Elliot into a meticulous observer. He no longer simply cooked, he studied. He memorized the guards' schedules, the officers' rotations, the moments when vigilance waned. He listened to every conversation that crossed the kitchen, every order given, every complaint voiced. He learned that the camp operated according to an implacable logic, a well-oiled machine where every cog had its function and nothing was left to chance. The prisoners who arrived were sorted into 3 categories: those who could work, those who would be executed immediately, and those who would serve as resources for the kitchen. This last category was never officially mentioned, but Elliot understood that it existed and that it was managed with chilling administrative precision. One morning, while Klaus was busy preparing breakfast for the officers, Elliot took advantage of a moment of solitude to delve into the records again. This time, he went further. He discovered that the deliveries of human flesh didn't come only from the camp's mass graves. Some came from neighboring villages, from massacres organized in the surrounding forests, from entire convoys of civilians executed and then transported here. The dates corresponded to the major SS crackdowns in the region. Elliot did the math. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people had been turned into food since this system was established. And every meal he had prepared, every dish he had served, had contributed to erasing their existence in the most abject way imaginable. He closes the registers and remains motionless, his hands flat on the table. He thinks of David, the young Polish prisoner who cleans around the kitchen. David sometimes speaks to him, always briefly, always making sure no one sees them. He tells him fragments of his life before, his medical studies in Warsaw, his family decimated in a raid, his father shot before his eyes. David is one of the few prisoners in the camp who has retained a glimmer in his eyes, a will to bear witness, to survive not for himself, but to tell what happened here. Elliot admires this strength, even if he doesn't truly understand it. He himself is no longer sure he wants to survive. He is no longer sure he deserves to survive. One evening, as Elliot was dumping trash near the barracks, David approached him with unusual urgency. He looked around, then quickly whispered, "There's a small group of prisoners planning something. We don't know exactly what, but we know they're preparing an action. You should meet them." Elliot frowned. "Why me?" David looked at him intently. "Because you have access to the officer's kitchen. Because you can do things we can't. And because I can see in your eyes that you've had enough." Elliot hesitated. Joining an internal resistance group, however small, was a death sentence if things went wrong. But David added, "We're all going to die anyway. The only question is whether we'll die as silent victims or take some of them with us." This phrase echoed in Elliot's head for days. He finally agreed. David arranged a discreet meeting one night in one of the camp's most remote barracks, where sick prisoners were crammed together and guards rarely came. Elliot slipped out after midnight, taking advantage of a time when patrols were less frequent. He found David waiting for him near a broken pipe. They walked in silence, avoiding the searchlights that swept the camp at regular intervals. The barrack was plunged into darkness, lit only by a dim candle placed in the center of a circle of 5 emaciated men. David made the introductions. There was Piotr, a former Polish soldier, Jakub, a Czech carpenter, Samuel, a French schoolteacher, and Leon, a German communist imprisoned for treason. Piotr speaks first. He speaks broken but understandable English. "We know who you are. We know what you're doing in this kitchen. We also know you're American and that you didn't choose to be here. But now you have a choice to do something that matters." Elliot asks, "What exactly do you want?" Samuel, the Frenchman, replies, "We want to hit the officers where it hurts. We want to poison them all at once at a big banquet. And then we want to set fire to the camp and try to escape in the chaos." Elliot shakes his head. "That's suicide. Even if you manage to poison the officers, the guards will kill you all before you've gone 10 meters. Jacob interjects, "Maybe, but at least we'll have killed Nazis. At least we won't have just waited passively to be murdered." Elliot remains silent. He understands their logic, but he also sees the flaws. This isn't a survival plan. It's a plan of desperate revenge. Yet a part of him is tempted. A part of him wants to see these officers die in agony, poisoned by the very meals they devoured with such relish. He asks, "How do you intend to obtain the poison?" Leon, the German, pulls a small bottle from his pocket. Cyanide, stolen from the camp infirmary. Enough to kill about 30 men if the dosage is right. Elliot takes the bottle, turns it over in his fingers. It's a clear, odorless liquid. Easy to mix into a sauce, a soup, anything. He asks, "When?" Piotr replies, "In 3 weeks. The commandant is organizing a grand banquet to celebrate a recent victory at the front. All the senior officers will be there. It's our only chance." Elliot nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it, but I have one condition." Samuel asked, "Which is?" Elliot looked at them all. "If we do this, we have to accept that innocent people will die in retaliation. The entire camp will be massacred. Are you aware of that?" Silence fell. Piotr finally answered, "We're already dead, all of us. The only difference is that some of us will choose how we die." Elliot put the bottle back in his pocket. "Then I'm with you." The next 3 weeks were the most trying of Elliot's life. He continued to cook as usual, but every gesture was calculated, every preparation a mental rehearsal of what he would have to do on the day of the banquet. He studied the dishes that would be served, the sauces that would be prepared, the moments when he could add the poison unseen. Klaus noticed nothing. The German was too absorbed in his own work, too used to Elliot to suspect anything. But Elliot could see that Klaus was beginning to show signs of fatigue. His hands sometimes trembled when he carved the meat. He drank more and more, small sips of alcohol stolen from the officers' stores. One evening, as they were cleaning the kitchen, Klaus suddenly said, "You know, Elliot, I'm not a bad man. Before this war, I cooked in a restaurant in Munich. I had a wife, 2 children. I never wanted to hurt anyone." Elliot stares at him without replying. Klaus continues, "But when you're caught in a machine like this, you don't have a choice. You do what you're told or you die. And you think that maybe, if you survive long enough, you can become a normal man again. But I know now that's impossible. We'll never be normal again. We'll carry this with us until the end." Elliot puts his hand on Klaus's shoulder. "I know." Klaus shakes his head and goes back to his pots and pans. Elliot wonders if he should warn Klaus about what's going to happen, but he decides against it. Klaus is an accomplice, willingly or not. He deserves the same fate as the others. The day of the banquet arrives. The camp is abuzz with activity. The officers are excited and boisterous, talking of military victories and upcoming operations. The dining hall has been decorated with Nazi flags, candles, and white tablecloths. Elliot and Klaus spend the entire day preparing a feast worthy of a Parisian restaurant. Onion soup, roast meat with gravy, scalloped potatoes, and roasted vegetables. Elliot prepares a special gravy for the roast, a thick and fragrant sauce that will perfectly mask the taste of the poison. When Klaus's back is turned, Elliot takes out the vial of cyanide and slowly pours its contents into the pot of gravy. He stirs calmly, as if he were simply adding another ingredient. The poison dissolves instantly. Nothing betrays its presence. The service begins. The officers arrive, all in full dress uniform, medals pinned to their chests. They settle around the large table and begin to devour the dishes. Elliot pours the sauce over each plate of roast with surgical precision. He watches the officers taste it, nod their heads in satisfaction, and help themselves to seconds. Klaus, who knows nothing, smiles with pride. "They love it, Elliot. You've done a magnificent job." Elliot doesn't reply. He goes back to the kitchen and waits. David explained to him that cyanide takes effect in 15 to 30 minutes. He has to be ready to act as soon as the first symptoms appear. 20 minutes later, the first officer collapses, then a second, then a third. The screams begin. Chairs fall. The men writhe in pain, vomit, and choke. Chaos erupts in the room. The guards rush in, but they don't understand what's happening. Klaus runs into the kitchen, his face ashen. "What's going on? What did we give them?" Elliot looks him straight in the eye. "The truth." Klaus understands instantly. He recoils in horror. "You're crazy. You've killed us all. Elliot leaves the kitchen and runs toward the barracks where David and the others are waiting. The plan is set in motion. They plan to set fire to the ammunition depots while the camp is in a panic, then escape through a breach in the fence they've been preparing for weeks. But when Elliot arrives at the rendezvous point, he finds David alone, slumped against a wall, blood gushing from a chest wound. The other members of the group are lying dead around him. David looks up at Elliot and whispers, They knew. Someone betrayed us." Elliot kneels beside him. "Who?" David coughs, spitting out blood. "I don't know, but they were waiting for us. They shot us as soon as we tried to leave." Elliot feels panic rising. The plan has failed. The officers may be dead, but the camp machine keeps running, and now he's going to pay the price. Sirens wail across the camp. Elliot hears the soldiers' boots pounding the frozen ground, orders barked in German, dogs barking furiously. He knows he only has minutes before he'll be discovered. David is breathing heavily, each breath a wet, horrible rattle. Elliot takes his hand. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." David shakes his head weakly. "No, you did. What you had to do. At least. They're dead. At least." His voice trails off. His eyes go cold. Elliot gently closes the young man's eyelids and remains there, crouched in the shadows, surrounded by corpses, knowing that in a few moments he will join those silent bodies. But the soldiers don't come for him right away. They're too busy dealing with the chaos in the main building. Elliot hears screams, conflicting orders, the sounds of men vomiting and dying. He realizes the poison has worked beyond his wildest expectations. About 30 senior officers are dying right now, and no one knows exactly what happened. Elliot gets up and runs toward the fence where David and the others had prepared their escape route. The breach is still there, partially hidden by branches and snow. He could try. He could flee alone into the forest, try to survive the cold, search for the Soviet lines, which, according to rumors, are now only a few dozen kilometers away. But as he approaches the fence, he hears something that freezes him in his tracks. Screams. The screams of women and children. He turns and sees soldiers dragging prisoners from their barracks and lining them up in the main courtyard. Spotlights illuminate the scene with a harsh, unforgiving white light. An SS officer, one of the few who hadn't been at the banquet, shouts orders. Elliot immediately understands what's about to happen. A mass execution. Mass retaliation for the poisoning of the officers. He sees Klaus among the lined-up prisoners, handcuffed, his face covered in blood. Klaus looks for him, and their eyes meet for a second. There's no anger in the German's eyes, just resignation. Elliot slowly backed into the shadows. He knew he should be running now while no one was watching, but his legs wouldn't move. He stood there, mesmerized by the horror unfolding before his eyes. The SS officer gave the order. The machine guns opened fire. Bodies collapsed by the dozens, then by the hundreds. The noise was deafening, a mechanical, endless rattle. Elliot saw Klaus fall. He saw women collapse, shielding their children. He saw men trying to run, cut down before they could take 3 steps. The massacre lasted 15 minutes. When the guns finally fell silent, hundreds of bodies were piled in the courtyard and the ground had turned red. Elliot vomits. He falls to his knees and vomits until his stomach is empty. He trembles all over. He has just realized what he has done. He wanted to kill the officers, but he has also condemned all those innocent people. David was right. They were all going to die anyway. But now it is he, Elliot Marsh, who has triggered their execution. It is his poison that has provoked this bloody revenge. He thought he was striking the Nazis, but he has mostly killed prisoners who had done nothing wrong. Guilt washes over him like an icy wave. He cowers in the darkness and waits for the soldiers to come for him. But they still don't come. All attention is focused on cleaning up the massacre and treating the poisoned officers who are still dying. Elliot realizes he might have a chance, a small chance. He crawls to the fence, squeezes through the gap, and plunges into the forest. He runs without thinking, without direction, simply to get away. Branches scratch his face, snow seeps into his shoes. The cold bites at his skin. He runs until his lungs burn and his legs refuse to carry him any further. Then he collapses against a tree and loses consciousness. When he wakes up, it's daylight. The pale winter sun filters through the bare branches of the trees. Elliot doesn't know how long he slept. An hour? Several hours? He's freezing, starving, and dehydrated. He gets up with difficulty and keeps walking. He has no idea where he's going. He walks east because that's where the Soviet lines are supposed to be. For 2 days he wanders through the forest, eating snow to quench his thirst, avoiding roads and villages. He crosses paths with German patrols twice and manages to hide just in time. On the third night, he finds an old abandoned shed and takes refuge there to sleep. That's when he has a dream. A dream where he's back in his kitchen in Baltimore preparing a meal for his wife, Sarah. He cuts up some meat, marinates it, and puts it in the oven. But when he takes the dish out, he sees that it's David's arm he's cooked. Sarah comes into the kitchen smiling and says, "It smells delicious, honey." Elliot tries to stop her from eating, but she takes a bite and says, "This is the best dish you've ever made." Elliot wakes up screaming. It takes him several minutes to realize that he's in a freezing warehouse, alone, thousands of miles from Baltimore. The next day, he was found by a Soviet patrol. The soldiers initially mistook him for a German spy and threatened him with their rifles, but Elliot managed to explain to them in English that he was American and had escaped from a prisoner of war camp. The Soviets took him to their base. They gave him food, warm clothes, and a bed. They interrogated him for hours about the camp he had come from and what he had seen there. Elliot told them everything: the food, the human flesh, the bureaucratic system, the poisoning of the officers, and the massacre that followed. The Soviet officers listened with impassive faces. One of them said, "We knew the Nazis were monsters, but this is beyond anything we could have imagined." Elliot was repatriated west a few weeks later, transferred from base to base until he reached American lines. By April 1945, when the war in Europe ended, he was already back in the United States. He was awarded a medal for surviving his captivity. He was offered psychological help, but he refused. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He never wanted to recount what he had been through again. He returned to Baltimore and was reunited with Sarah. She had been waiting for him for 3 years, hoping against all odds that he was still alive. When she saw him, she wept and hugged him tightly. "You're back. My God, you're back." But Elliot hasn't really come back. The man standing before Sarah is just an empty shell, a ghost who resembles her husband, but isn't really her anymore. He can't cook. The smell of cooking meat makes him sick. He has nightmares every night, nightmares where he's dismembering bodies, serving meals to officers, seeing David die over and over again. Sarah tries to help him, but she doesn't understand. How could she? He can't tell her what he's done. So Elliot changed his name. He became Nathan Cole. He moved to a small town in Montana where no one knew him. He found a job at a sawmill. He never spoke about the war. When people asked him what he did during the conflict, he simply said he was a prisoner of war and that it was a period he preferred not to discuss. Years passed. Sarah tried to rebuild a normal life, but the gap between them continued to widen. They had no children. Elliot refused. He didn't want to pass on what he carried within him. In 1952, Sarah left him. She could no longer live with a man who wasn't really there anymore. Elliot didn't try to stop her. He knew she was right. The decades flow by like an underground river, invisible but relentless. Nathan Cole, the man who was once Elliot Marsh, grows old in the anonymity of Montana. He works at the sawmill until his retirement in 1978, then settles in a small, isolated cabin near the mountains. He lives alone, surrounded by silence and snow. The townspeople know him as a quiet, somewhat eccentric man who never speaks of his past and refuses all invitations. Some think he's simply a misanthrope. Others whisper that he's hiding something. But no one really tries to find out. In a small American town in the 1980s, people respect their privacy, especially that of veterans. Elliot spends his days reading, walking in the woods, gazing at the mountains. He has learned to live with his memories like one lives with a chronic illness. They are always there. They hurt, but you eventually get used to the pain. The nightmares have become less frequent over time. Sometimes he goes a whole week without dreaming of David, of Klaus, of the bodies piled up in the yard. But the feeling of guilt never diminishes. It is like a stone lodged in his chest, heavy and cold, weighing down every breath. In 1989, something changed. An American journalist named Michael Brennan published a book about Nazi war crimes recently uncovered in declassified archives. The book, titled The Hidden Atrocities, contained an entire chapter on an Eastern camp where the SS allegedly practiced systematic cannibalism. The chapter relied on testimonies from Soviet soldiers who liberated the camp in 1945, German documents recovered from the ruins, and the partial testimony of an American cook who reportedly escaped after poisoning several officers. The cook's name was not mentioned, but the description matched Elliot's exact description. Elliot reads the book in the public library and feels his blood run cold. For 45 years, he's lived with the illusion that his secret was buried with the ashes of the camp. But now, the story is resurfacing. The book becomes a bestseller. The media seizes upon the case. Television programs feature reports on the hidden atrocities of war. And slowly, inexorably, people begin to do their research. Historians scour American military archives to identify the cook mentioned in the book. They search for survivors, witnesses, documents. One day, in November 1990, Elliot received a letter. It was from a history professor at the University of Chicago, named Dr. Rebecca Stein. The letter was polite, almost timid. Dr. Stein explained that she was researching the camps in the East and had found the trail of a certain Elliot Marsh, an American cook captured in 1944, reported missing, and then found in 1945. She had discovered that after the war, Elliot Marsh had changed his name to Nathan Cole and settled in Montana. She asked if he would be willing to testify, to tell his story, to help history understand what had happened in that camp. Elliot burns the letter. He doesn't reply. But 2 weeks later, Dr. Stein knocks on his door. She's a woman in her 40s with short hair, thick glasses, and a determined look. She says, "Mr. Cole, I know who you are. I know what you've been through. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to listen." Elliot stands motionless on his doorstep. He could slam the door in her face and return to his silence. But something inside him is tired of being silent. Something wants to finally speak. He lets her in. They sit in the small living room cluttered with books and old newspapers. Dr. Stein takes out a tape recorder and asks permission to record. Elliot hesitates, then nods. And for the first time in 45 years, he tells everything. He recounts the capture, the camp, the kitchen, Klaus, the human flesh, the ledgers, David, the poisoning plan, the massacre that followed, his escape. He speaks for 3 hours without stopping, as if all the words held back for decades were pouring out at once. Dr. Stein listens without interrupting, his face grave, sometimes with tears in his eyes. When Elliot finishes, a long silence falls. Dr. Stein turns off the tape recorder and says, "Mr. Marsh, what you did by poisoning those officers, many people would call it an act of heroic resistance." Elliot shakes his head violently. "No, it wasn't heroic. I killed hundreds of innocent prisoners. I provoked the massacre that followed. I should have known. I should have foreseen that the Nazis would take revenge on the weakest." Dr. Stein thinks for a moment, then replies, "Perhaps. But those officers you killed would have gone on to massacre thousands more had they lived. You cut short their murderous careers. That's something." Elliot looks at her bitterly. "You don't understand. I didn't poison them to save lives. I poisoned them because I wanted them to die in agony, because I wanted to see them agonize like I saw their victims agonize. It was revenge, not heroism, and that revenge cost the lives of hundreds of people who didn't deserve to die." Dr. Stein leans toward him. "But you survived, and now you can bear witness. You can let the world know what happened in that camp. It's important. It's essential." Elliot stands up abruptly. "The world doesn't need my testimony. The world already knows what the Nazis did. Anything I could add wouldn't change anything." Dr. Stein doesn't give up. She comes back to see him several times in the following weeks. She shows him documents she found in the archives, lists of executed prisoners, reports on the camp's operations, testimonies from Soviet soldiers. And among these documents, there's something that deeply disturbs Elliot. It's a list dated the day after the poisoning, a list of 347 prisoners executed in reprisal. And next to each name, there's a brief description. David Lieberman, 22, medical student. Piotr Kowalski, 38, former soldier. Samuel Durand, 45, school teacher. Elliot reads the names, one by one, and feels something inside him break forever. He knew these people. He had seen them in the camp. Some of them had spoken to him. And now he sees their names printed on a list of the dead, a list caused by his actions. He told Dr. Stein, "You want me to testify? Very well, I will testify. But I'm not going to tell a heroic story of resistance. I'm going to tell the truth. I participated in a monstrous system, and when I tried to destroy it, I killed more innocent people than guilty ones." Dr. Stein agreed. She arranged a series of filmed interviews. Elliot told his story on camera with clinical precision and without attempting to justify himself. The videos were shown in a documentary produced by an American public television network in 1992. The documentary, titled The Cook of the SS, caused a public outcry. Some see Elliot as a tragic hero, a man who did what he could under impossible circumstances. Others view him as a Nazi accomplice, a man who cooked human flesh for months before rebelling. Holocaust survivor organizations are calling for him to be tried for war crimes. Veterans groups defend him, claiming he was a victim himself. The debate rages in newspapers, on television, and in universities. Elliot watches all this with a strange detachment. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't try to explain. He has said what he had to say. Now it's up to the world to decide what to do with it. In 1993, the U.S. Department of Justice opens an investigation to determine whether Elliot can be prosecuted for war crimes. The investigation lasts 2 years. International experts are consulted. Testimonies are gathered. And finally, in 1995, the conclusion is reached. Elliot Marsh acted under duress, in a context of captivity where refusal would have meant certain death. His act of poisoning, although it provoked tragic reprisals, targeted Nazi war criminals. He will not be prosecuted. But this decision doesn't set Elliot free. Nothing can. He knows what he's done. He knows who he is. And he knows that no court of law, no legal absolution, will ever erase the cold stone that weighs heavily in his chest. The year 1998 marked an unexpected turning point in Elliot Marsh's life. He was 76 years old now, his body worn by decades and the weight of memories. He still lived in his cabin in Montana, but he was no longer alone. Since the documentary aired, people had been writing to him regularly. Camp survivors, historians, students, the simply curious. Some letters were full of compassion. Others overflowed with hatred. Elliot read them all, but he almost never replied. He felt that his story now belonged to the world, and that the judgments made about him no longer truly concerned him. Then, in March 1998, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from Poland. The envelope was stamped with foreign postmarks and smelled of old paper. Inside were 3 pages written in English with shaky handwriting. The letter began, "Mr. Marsh, you don't know me, but I know you. My name is Anna Lieberman. David Lieberman was my brother." Elliot felt his hands tremble as he read these words. He placed the letter on the table and remained motionless for several minutes, unable to continue. Then he resumed reading. Anna explains that she survived the war, hidden by a Polish farming family. After 1945, she spent decades searching for information about her brother, David. She knew he had been captured and sent to a camp, but she didn't know which one or what had happened to him. It was while watching the 1992 documentary that she finally found her answer. She heard Elliot mention David by name, recount their conversations, and describe his death. Anna writes, "For 50 years I lived without knowing. Now I know. And I wanted to thank you." Elliot rereads this last sentence several times, unable to understand it. Thank? Why would this woman thank him? Anna continues. My brother died trying to resist. He died fighting, not a passive victim. Thanks to you, I know he tried to do something. That he didn't just wait for death. That matters to me, it matters enormously. Then she adds something that deeply upsets Elliot. But there's something else you need to know. Something historians haven't discovered. Something I only learned a few months ago. Anna explains that she recently gained access to declassified Polish archives. Among the documents, she found a Soviet report written in April 1945, just after the camp's liberation. The report contains a startling detail. After the poisoning of the officers and the massacre of the prisoners, the camp did not continue to function normally as Elliot had believed. In reality, the poisoning created complete administrative chaos. The dead officers were those who knew the details of the resource rationalization program. Their replacements, rushed in from Berlin, did not understand the system and were horrified by what they discovered. According to the Soviet report, the new commandant, who arrived 3 days after the poisoning, ordered the immediate cessation of cannibalism and had all incriminating records destroyed. The camp continued to operate for another 2 months, but as an ordinary forced labor camp, however horrific, and no longer as the laboratory of total horror it had become. Anna writes, "What this means, Mr. Marsh, is that your action put an end to the worst. Yes, 347 people died in reprisal. But how many more would have been killed and turned into food if the system had continued for 2 more months? 500? 1? Eurozorera? We'll never know. But the Soviet report estimates that the camp was receiving about 200 new prisoners a week at that time, the majority of whom were immediately executed and recycled in their vile terminology. Do the math." Elliot puts down the letter and does the math. 2 months, 8 weeks, 1,600 prisoners. Perhaps half would have been killed and cannibalized. 800 people. Subtract the 347 who died in reprisal, and that makes... He can't finish the calculation. His mind refuses. But Anna does it for him. You may have saved more than 400 lives, Mr. Marsh. Not directly, not consciously. But by destroying the system and the men who operated it, you stopped a machine that would have continued to grind down hundreds more. I'm not telling you this to absolve you. I know you carry the weight of the 347. I'm telling you this simply because it's the truth, and the truth deserves to be known, even when it's complicated. The letter ends with an invitation. If you wish, I would like to meet you. I live in Krakow. I'm old now like you, and I don't have much time left, but I would like to see the face of the man who knew my brother in his final days. Respectfully, Anna Lieberman. Elliot sat in his cabin for 3 days, unable to make a decision. Anna's revelation had cracked something inside him. For 50 years, he had lived with the absolute certainty that he had caused more harm than good, that his act of resistance was, in fact, an additional crime added to his initial crime of cooking human flesh. It was his punishment, his eternal penance. But now Anna presented him with another truth. His action may have had meaning, not a heroic meaning, not a complete moral justification, but a real impact on the course of events. And this truth was almost more unbearable than guilt, because it stripped him of the bitter comfort of certainty. Finally, in June 1998, Elliot flew to Poland. It was the first time he had left the United States since 1945. The journey was long and exhausting. He arrived in Krakow on a gray, damp afternoon. Anna was waiting for him at his hotel. She was a tiny woman hunched over with white hair but incredibly bright eyes. They shook hands, and then she hugged him. Elliot began to cry. For the first time since the war, he truly cried without restraint like a child. Anna held him close and whispered, I know. It's over now." They spend 3 days together. Anna shows him photos of David before the war. A smiling young man in a suit, medical books under his arm. She tells him about her brother's childhood, his dreams, his plans. She transforms David from a symbol of guilt into a real, whole, beloved person. And strangely, this helps Elliot. It allows him to mourn David not as an abstract victim of his decision, but as a human being who lived fully before he died. Anna also takes him to visit what remains of the camp. The site was transformed into a memorial in the 1970s. Now there are commemorative plaques, a small museum, and marked paths winding through the ruins of the barracks. Elliot walks slowly through the site. He recognizes some of the buildings, some of the sections. Over there was the kitchen. Here was the courtyard where the massacre took place. The mass graves have been filled in and covered with grass, but their outlines are still visible. Crosses and stars of David mark the locations. Elliot kneels before one of them and remains there for a long time silent. On the last day, Anna gives him something. It's a small notebook, worn and yellowed. "It belonged to David," she says. "The Soviets found it on his body and included it in their archives. I got it back a year ago." Elliot opens the notebook with trembling hands. Inside are notes in Polish and English, reflections, observations about life in the camp, prayers, and on the last page, a note dated the day before his death. "Tomorrow we act. I don't know if we'll survive. Probably not. But the American cook has agreed to help us. His name is Elliot. He's scared, like all of us. But he's brave. We'll do what we can. If I die, let someone know we tried." Elliot closes the notebook. He holds it against his chest. Anna says softly, "My brother trusted you. He believed in what you were doing together. He died knowing he had tried to fight. That's all we can do in this world. Try." Elliot nods, unable to speak. He returns to the United States a week later. But something has changed within him. It's not peace exactly, nor is it forgiveness. It's more like acceptance. Acceptance that he lived through hell, that he made impossible choices, that those choices had terrible consequences and perhaps also some less terrible ones, that he will never know for sure whether he acted rightly or wrongly, because in a context like that, those categories lose their meaning. All he knows is that he tried, like David, like Klaus in his twisted way, like all those who found themselves trapped in that machine. Elliot Marsh died in 2003 at the age of 81. He is buried in a small Montana cemetery under the name Nathan Cole, but at his request, his headstone reads, "Elliot Marsh, 1922-2003. He tried." Dr. Rebecca Stein attended the funeral. Anna Lieberman sent a wreath from Poland with a card that read, "For my brother's friend." Today, the story of Elliot Marsh is taught in some history and ethics courses. It is used to pose impossible questions to students. What would you do in his place? Should he have refused to cook and died immediately? Should he have cooked and done nothing? Was he right to poison the officers knowing it would provoke reprisals? Is there ever a right answer when all options lead to death? These questions don't have easy answers. And that's precisely why we must keep asking them. Because history isn't made up of clearly defined heroes and villains. It's made up of human beings placed in extreme situations, making choices with the limited information and terrible options available to them. And our responsibility, as survivors of these stories, as heirs to this memory, is never to simplify, never to pretend we would have done better, never to forget. So I ask you, what would you have done if you had been Elliot Marsh? Would you have cooked to survive? Would you have poisoned the officers knowing the consequences? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, subscribe to this channel, because the world is full of stories like this, stories no one wants to hear but that we absolutely must know. Stories that remind us what humanity is capable of in its darkest moments, but also the courage it sometimes takes simply to try to remain human when everything around you is collapsing. Elliot Marsh's story is not a hero's tale. It's a story of survival, guilt, impossible choices, and complicated truths. It's a story that forces us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, how far would we go to survive? And above all, what would remain of our humanity afterward?